and hello everyone. Good evening from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. This is Nawal Al-Hamwi. I have my colleague Khulud Al-Banna. She'll be moderating today's session chats. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Firstly, I want to thank our sponsors, StreamYard, for sponsoring our event. We couldn't have done it without their help. So thank you, StreamYard, for helping the community. So we will be having in the coming days sessions about Android development, as well as what are the latest updates in Android 11. So stay tuned. Today is day one, and we have tonight Jeroen Mols. Jeroen Mols is a Google developer expert in Android, and he is the former lead Android developer at Philips Hue and an internationally recognized speaker. With a passion for complex systems and highly technical apps, Jeroen has helped realize 4 connected products and over 15 Android applications. So, Jeroen, the stage is all yours. All best of luck.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Quick check, is my screen sharing? Yep, awesome. Okay, hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Today I want to talk to you a bit about Android KTX. I'm going to tell you quite a few things about it, what it is, why it's useful, and so on. But before we get started, maybe a small little word about myself. So I'm Jeroen Mols, I'm Belgian. I'm a Google developer expert in Android, and I currently work for Plaat, which is a fintech company. And what we basically do is we provide an API to which you can actually integrate in order to get access to financial data. So we power apps like Robinhood, Venmo, and many others. So if you want to follow me, I'm quite active on Twitter at Molsjeroen, so feel free to do that. So let's get started. The first thing I'd like to cover is what Android KTX is and why it actually exists. Next, I want to give you a crash course, but the crash course is going to be super opinionated. I want to show you what Android KTX extensions I find most useful. And then we'll also explore how we could write our own. And then at the end, I'll wrap everything up with provide you more links where you can browse the source code and so on. So let's dive right in. What is Android KTX and why does it even exist? So Android can sometimes be tedious, to say the least. So I don't know if any of you recognize this, but this is what you used to do or used to need to do if you want to create it, for instance, like a square image view. So a square image view where the width equals the height. Well, imagine if you create a custom view and you want to do that. You can't immediately do it because if you, in onCreate view, if you then actually access the width and the height, those would both be 0 because you have to wait for a layout pass to be applied and then only you would know the width and height. So in order to do this very simple, useful thingy, so make the image view square, you actually need those 12 lines of code on top, which is quite verbose. And that's not the only problem, because you would also have to remove the onLayout change listener. And if you forget to do that, you would have a leak. And then there's a third problem even, because this could even have a race condition. Because what if you attach the listener after the view had already been laid out? Then you would no longer get this layout change listener callback. So it's quite tedious, so it's super verbose, it's potentially error prone, and there could be race conditions. So there should be a better way. And obviously my talk is about KTX, so KTX to the rescue. KTX provides an extension function where you can just say on the view, do onLayout, and then just immediately do the thing that you'd like to do. So this is a lot more concise, it's easier to read, you can't have any leaks, and it's also, the race condition would also be gone. So let's have a look, because the really cool thing about all of the support libraries and Android itself is that all of the code is open source. So let's dive in the code of this to see how it actually works. So under the hood, the do onLayout function looks like this. So in the happy scenario, this will actually be invoked. So on the next layout, KTX will ensure to actually run your action. But if the view had already been laid out before, then KTX will immediately execute your action. So the race condition is gone. And it's even better than that, because if the view had already been laid out, but there's still a pending layout, then Android KTX will ensure to first do the layout and only then call your action, so your action gets invoked with like the freshest data. And if you look at a method signature, you see that KTX makes extensive use of like a lot of Kotlin program language features. So it's an inline function to avoid runtime overhead. It's an extension function on the view class, so you can very naturally invoke this function, for instance, on image view. And then it also takes a lambda as the last parameter, which enables you to actually have this DSL-like syntax where you move the lambda outside of the curly brackets. Now, let's have a look at the do-on-next layout function. So this function is quite exactly what you would expect. This is the exact same code as what we had before. The only difference is that we now don't have to write it ourselves. We just get it for free from Android KTX. So what is Android KTX actually? Well, most support libraries are still written in Java, which means that if we want to use them from Kotlin, it's not always as idiomatic. There's a few exceptions to that, like for instance, Jetpack Compose is the best known example. That's pure Kotlin, but also the new paging library, and I think even the benchmarking library. But the vast majority of support libraries is still in Java. And Kotlin and KTX will actually leverage all of these nice Kotlin language features like extension properties, extension functions, default parameters, coroutines, and so on to make the existing support libraries more idiomatic and easier to use. But it's not just that, because the Android OS itself is also mostly written in Java. So there's even extension functions for Android. And then finally, there's also extension functions for some Google-provided libraries like Firebase or Play Core services. And also, to me, KTX isn't just about making all of these libraries more idiomatic to use, but it's also just about simplifying your daily use cases and making it easier, actually. Making it easier, for instance, to like respond to layout changes. How do you use it? Well, instead of using the normal artifact you would use on Android, which is like androidx.core, the core artifact, you replace this with a new artifact called KTX. So this is everything you need to do, and then you get the KTX extension functions. Now, this is actually also my biggest pet peeve with KTX, because there's many very useful extension functions, as you will see in a second, but the discoverability is very difficult. Because, not every library has KTX extensions. Not even every library needs KTX extensions. For instance, the paging library, it's already written in Kotlin, so why would we add extensions to that? And then the third thing is, even non-Jetpack libraries have KTX extensions. So my best advice I can give you is, whenever you import an Android X artifact into your builds, make sure to try the -KTX artifact and then see if you can actually compile this. The version is always exactly the same as the non-KTX artifact. If it doesn't compile, then you should fall back to the non-KTX version. It's a bit unfortunate, but it's the only thing we can do at this point. So let's now have a very opinionated guide through Android KTX. Animations. Animations are great, but if you want to do something while the animation is running or respond to like the beginning or start of the animation, it's pretty verbose because you need to implement an animation listener. And imagine if I'm only interested in doing something when the animation is done, then I need to implement these 4 methods, and I already made it quite nice using Kotlin. Imagine if you do this in Java, it's even more verbose, but so still it's quite verbose to do. Thanks to KTX, we can just say like, hey, animator.doOnStart, doOnRepeat, and so on. So this is just a lot more idiomatic, shorter, easier to read, more concise. By the way, notice in the top right corner where you can see the Jetpack and Kotlin logo. So whenever I'm giving a KTX example, that will be on the slides. When it's a non-KTX example, that won't be on the slides. All right, similarly also for like do one pause on resume, which is usually a separate listener, you have the same thing. Then system services. If you're on Android M, getting a system service looks like this. And KTX makes that slightly nicer by just saying like, hey, get system service, and you just provide directly the K class, and it will actually do the casting for you, which is easier. And this also works on any Android version. For shared preferences, this is one of the, it's not an Android support library API. This is actually an Android API. So this is an example of a KTX function extending the Android framework. So shared preferences have this a bit peculiar API where you need to call a terminal operator, or your changes won't actually be stored. So you need to call apply. If you forget to call apply, then nothing will actually happen. KTX makes sure that you can never forget to do that, because you just say shared preferences.edit. You provide a lambda of what changes you want to make to the shared preferences.editor, and that's it. If you want to commit instead of apply, you can also do that. There's a param you can actually provide to the edit function. Then colors. This is also like pretty verbose to work with otherwise. And Android KTX just makes this more natural, because you can take a color representation in a string and you can just say, hey, to color int, and the resulting int, you can just say, hey, convert it to a drawable for me. Similar to URI and file, you can actually take a string that represents a URL and then just call up to URI on it, convert it to a file, and convert the file back to a URI. Pretty simple, but actually often in day-to-day use, they can really be delightful to use, I would say. For Vue, we already talked about this. So you have do on layout, but that's not the only one. You could also do on the next layout, pre-draw, attach, detach. And then there's also accessor properties and even setter properties to change the margins, which is convenient. Because if we see here, for instance, these are some other KTX extension functions. Like before, if you wanted to update the padding, you had to specify a padding for every side, so top, bottom, left, right. Whereas with KTX, you can just say update the padding and use the right, and I want to update only the right one. To then update the layout parameters, this is also a really nice function. So before, you would have to get the layout parameters, cast it to the right type. For instance, constraint layout parameters. Then you could actually access all of the properties, modify them, and then later you would have to apply them back to the view. So the view would get updated, but Android KTX makes that so much easier to do. All right, visibility. This is another, just seemingly innocent thingy, but visibility on Android, unfortunately, is a tri-state. A view could both be, it could either be invisible, but still occupying screen real estate, or it could be gone, where it's really gone from the screen. And what Android KTX actually does is it adds an extension property is visible, and you can directly assign that value. So if you say view.invisible is false, then the visibility will be toggled to gone. So you don't really have to care about view.invisible anymore. It's either view.visible or view.gone, and it's wrapped in a nice extension property. For VIEWGROUP, also some easy or handy extensions. So you can just loop over all of the views in a VIEWGROUP for each. You can actually add or remove views using like operator overloading. Very handy when you need it. Then for TEXTVIEW, so if you want to do something when text has changed, then you would have to implement a text watcher. But thanks to Android KTX, you can do, hey, do after text changed or do before text changed. So again, handy extensions. The bundle yeah, this is one I only discovered fairly recently. For instance, if you want to create your own fragment, so you make your fragment, you can't pass parameters into a fragment constructor because Android may kill the fragment or may destroy and recreate a fragment at any point, basically during like the life cycle of your application. So that's why you can't override the default constructor. So what we do with fragments is we actually create a bundle and then we set that as arguments to the fragment. And creating the bundle is way easier now because thanks to KTX, you can just say like, hey, bundle of this to that. You then create your new fragment, set the arguments, return that, and then you can actually start passing data into your view. Then for view models, so if you want to actually create a view model, you need to actually attach it to either an activity or fragment. And the way you do that, scoping the view model, is by doing viewModelProviders.off, and then you say, this is the kind of view model I would like to have. And KTX actually adds a delegate property for that. So now you can just create a property on your activity, and you can say by view models, and I would like to have something of this class, and then KTX will give you a view model scope to that activity. Similarly for the fragments, you either have like a view model of the fragment or view model of an activity. And KTX actually also expresses that neatly by saying by view models or by activity view models. These ones I use very, very much actually. And if you have a view model which requires a factory to create because you want to pass some data in, that's also possible. Then you just say by view models, and you can actually provide it a lambda that creates your factory. Fragment transactions. This is again an API much similar to shared preferences. So you need to call a terminal operator or nothing happens. And again, nicely abstracted away by Android KTX, you just say fragment manager.commit, and then you actually do the fragment transaction that you would like to do. And there's even extra options like allow state loss or commit immediately. Coroutines. So coroutines are Kotlin's new threading mechanism, if you're not familiar with them. And what's really cool about coroutines is that it's so-called structured concurrency. So where in Java, you could just start a thread and forget to actually ever destroy it, or it could run indefinitely. In Kotlin, you could still do that with coroutines, but you would always have to attach the concurrent thing, so the parallel or the background operation, you always have to attach it to some kind of scope. For instance, you attach your thread, which is then called a coroutine in Kotlin. It's slightly different, but it's a way to reason about it. So you create a new coroutine, you attach it to your activity, and then when the activity is destroyed, all of those coroutines attached to it will actually also be cleaned up so that you can't leak any networking requests or long-running operations there, which is pretty nice. And KTX provides off-the-shelf scopes which you can use. So you have a scope for an activity, for a fragment, or for a view model. And if you attach a coroutine to that, then whenever your view model, fragment, or activity goes out of scope, everything will be cleaned up for you. There's nothing you have to do for that. And this is just like a very opinionated guide through all of the extension functions that there's there, but there's many more. There's extension function for live data, for menus, for room, for work manager. So by all means, make sure to check them out. The link is below, but I'll also give you the link again later on. Cool. But so now that we have an idea of what kind of extension functions exist, I'm wondering, wouldn't it be possible for us to write our own? And yeah, surely we can do that. So before I worked at Plaid, I actually worked on a banking application. And when you're transferring money, money only has like 2 decimal digits. So I wanted to have a function that just says on an EDITTEXT, hey, from now on, I just want you to only accept these amount of decimals. So for money, it would be 2 decimals. And we can actually do that. So we can create our own extension function on EDITTEXT, which then takes a parameter how many decimals we would like to accept. And then in there, that's quite complicated just because of the API. We have to add an input filter, and then the input filter will actually, whenever you add a new character, we'll see where is it added, how does this change my number in the end, and if it's if the amount of decimals remains under 2, then it will return the new number. Otherwise, it will just ignore the input. Another one that I always create, or that I like to create, is for toasts. So what I used to do is I would call this very long toast API, like here, toast.makeText, which is super verbose. I would forget to call show 9 out of 10 times. And I would also usually like mix the lengths, like some toasts would be short, some would be long. So a good tip is to just create an extension function on the fragment or activity, which is called toast, which either takes a string resource or a string. And then you can just in your code say toast, and that's it. And then if you want to disable toast for some reason or change their length, then you can easily do that in one place. Other extension functions that I created, just to give you an idea of like what's possible. We don't necessarily have to go into all of the details, but it's a check on a float to see if it's a decimal number or not, which you can just do by dividing it by 1 and then see what the modulus, is that the name? So what the remainder basically is. So yeah, it's not dividing by 1. It's how to say, so it's a modulus operator. So it's not a division, it's a modulus operator. So instead of like getting the division result, you actually get the remainder. And if that remainder is still significant, then it's a decimal number, otherwise it's not. Or a function to actually round something to exactly these amount of decimals. Another thing that I had created is, which is a bit weird that it doesn't exist. So on a tab layout, you could create a function called doOnTabSelected, which then wraps this pretty verbose onTabSelected listener. First clears the previous onTabSelected listener and then adds a new one. And then you can, in your code, easier deal with tabs. So this is just like a quick introduction on how you could write your own things. So then finally, I want to like give you the pointers on where you could discover more. So the list of KTX extensions I already shared with you. I think that's also hidden behind the QR code. But you could also just browse the source of Android KTX. And I think, so the source code has even moved to GitHub recently, so I should update that link. And there's also some KTX documentations where you can explore more. So let's wrap things up. KTX is actually a set of handy extension functions to the existing support libraries, Android framework, and even a few other libraries. They allow you to write more idiomatic code, but yeah, to be very blunt, it just makes your life as a developer easier and it simplifies daily use cases. You can get inspired by KTX functions as all of the code is open source. And then whenever you see something missing, you could write your own. And even because the code is now on GitHub, you could create a pull request and then see if the Android team would be willing to integrate those. If you found this interesting, I actually also regularly blog at jeroenmols.com/blog. These are 2 series I'm particularly proud of, like how you could modularize your app. So I propose an architecture how to do that, and also how you could handle feature flags. So feel free to check that out. The image credits, I didn't make those Lego figurine images myself, unfortunately. Clement127 did that. I highly recommend you to check out his work. It's pretty awesome, and it will definitely put a smile on your face. And that's it. So I'm at Maltune on Twitter. Thank you for being here, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Jeroen. We will wait for 1 minute for the questions, then we'll call it a night. It was an awesome session. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Okay, 1 minute has started.
Feel free to ask me anything. So it could be related to the presentation, but if you just have like Android questions in general, or even like, yeah, career questions, just don't be shy.
Okay, I have a question actually. I mean, I'm not an Android developer myself, but I have many Android like friends all over the world. So I was wondering, like, what are the best recommendations in your opinion for those who are just starting out with Android development?
That's actually that's a great question. So I think if you're completely new to Android, then I would recommend following one of the Google provided courses. So I think they have like Udacity courses on how to get started on Android developer with Android development. I think that would be a great place to start. If you're already like, if you're a bit familiar with like Kotlin or Java already, and if you already know a little bit about the Android framework, then Google has actually provided a lot of Android code labs, which you could try. For instance, like I mentioned in my presentation, coroutines. If you would like to start learning coroutines, then you could do that by just following a code lab. Or if you're new to dependency injection, there's a great code lab for that as well. So the code labs I also would highly recommend. And then the third resource is there's a couple of really nice public Android apps that you could check out. Like Plaid is one, not the Plaid, the company I work for, but Plaid built by Nick Butcher. I think also Chris Baines has this TV app. And then there's a third one, Band K or something. It's by Antonio, Antonio Leva. He also created this app, which is a bare bones Kotlin app, but it's also like a very interesting app to check out. So then basically, if you sum up my recommendations, it's if you're new, make sure that you start by somebody who like helps guide you through the process. So then I would start with an official course. If you're already a bit seasoned, then do a few code labs to polish up your skills. And if you have done that and you really want to just like see how are other people solving problems that I'm running into, then I would reference you to these open source applications. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeroen. So we have a question.
Yep.
So the question says, can we access device resources like the camera?
Yeah, we sure can. I'm not sure if there's actually Android KTX extensions for that. But Google very recently released a new library, or like very recently, I think at previous I/O or the year before, but it's only recently gone into stable, which is Android X.Camera, which is a wrapper on top of the existing camera frameworks, because the existing camera APIs in Android, they're pretty bad, to be very blunt. And Android KTX actually, so Android X.Camera makes that a hell of a lot better. So they make sure to solve the consistency across devices and even add features so that you can do like portrait mode photos or whatever on top. And then they handle the heavy lifting of like figuring out whether a device supports that for you or not. So it's an Android X library you can use. So it's like a library on top of the system. It's a support library, a Jetpack library. And that may or may not have KTX extensions. I should actually check that out. But it's important to know that like the reason for KTX extensions to exist is to really, as a Kotlin developer, make it easier for you to actually talk to existing libraries written in Java. And then also on top, just to make code more idiomatic, more concise, and hopefully also easier.
Awesome. So he clarified his question. I think he means like, can we access device resources like the camera in KTX? So he added this clarification for his question.
Yeah. So I'm not 100% sure about that. But so KTX is just it's an extra layer on top of the support libraries. So that means for every support library, there could be a KTX library on top. And KTX, they usually don't provide new functionality, but they just make it easier to use as a Kotlin developer, but it doesn't like radically solve a new problem. So in that sense, the answer to this question is like, yes, there exists a better API to deal with the cameras on Android, which is called AndroidX.camera. And likely that also has some KTX extensions, but it's not KTX solving the camera problem. It's the camera library solving the camera problem. And then KTX just makes it nicer if you're a Kotlin developer.
Awesome. So another question says, nice talk, how we can create our own extensions.
Thanks, Lucas. So extensions are actually, so it's just writing code. So like what I showed you before with write your own. So you can just write your own functions. For instance, if you want to add new functionality to like a text view, you can just create an extension function, fun text view dot, I don't know, mirror upside down. And then you can just create that function and provide an implementation, which would then be an extension function you created within your own project. You could then go even further and expose that to the rest of the world by making your own GitHub library so that people could use that. Or you could even try to open up a pull request to the Android X libraries, which are now on GitHub. And then the Google Android team may decide or may not decide to integrate them. Hopefully that answers your question. And what I personally do on a day-to-day basis is like, I write plenty of these extension functions. Like an extension function, I didn't write it, but a colleague of mine wrote it, which is a text view dot set text or hide. So then if you provided a text, and if the text is empty or null, the text view will just hide itself. If it's non-null, then the text view will just display itself, which is very much like KTX, but it just happens to be an extension function which we didn't provide to like the rest of the world. We could do that, honestly, but it's just a few of those extensions we have at the moment.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we don't have any more questions, so we'll call it a night. Thank you so much, Jeroen. And it was so nice having you with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, and have a great evening.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Ron.
Bye.